I mean, somebody writes a book, that's a big thing, and it has an impact on the world and sends out ripples. But Carl, I think you can see, you know, the ripples that this has sent out, not to just all of the people in this room, but to their family and their friends and the community beyond them. And I think for me that is profound. And I found the exhibition, not just what was on show, but also talking to the people who've been involved in putting it together, profoundly moving. And just about the most impressive thing I've ever witnessed at UEL, to be frank. You should be exceptionally proud. You've made me really proud. I would say we've had this desire to be London's leading university for civic engagement, and that's the sort of strapline to our corporate plan. And what you've done is to bring that into tangible, palpable form. You've made it happen. And for me, civic engagement, I mean, you know, one of the things during the consultation period that people said to me, often staff would say, but how will we explain civic engagement to the students? They might not understand it. And I always said, well, students will understand it in their own way. And of course today at the exhibition, you've understood it in 100 or so different ways. And that's really, really important. For me, civic engagement, though, is about 3 A's. Agency, the fact that each one of you can leave this university and become a change agent in your own community and make a difference. Agency. Really important that you feel empowered to do that. The second A is sort of something I would describe as actualization, which turns potential into being and doing something. And you've done that with the exhibition, but you will go on doing it, realizing your potential. And the third A for me is a sense of affiliation, a sense of acknowledging that the other is more important than the self. And that's where ethics lies. And I think there's a deep, profound sense of ethical engagement in what you've done. So well done, but I can't finish without you paying tribute. I know a lot of people have been involved in this and a lot of staff have been involved in it, but without Jennifer's work, this wouldn't have happened. So please. Wow, there's a lot of energy in the room. Okay, and finally, it would be remiss of me not to thank Carl for coming. I mean, amazing that he actually, from that corridor conversation we had in November to Carl actually being here, fantastic. That's a real coup for us, but I'm really, really grateful to Carl because he's a busy guy. He's at Columbia University, one of the leading universities in the world. But he made time to come here for you. And I think that, again, really merits your applause. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I feel like many of you in the audience are familiar with Carl's book, and may have read it several times. Students should have. drawn into an incredibly inspiring story, as well as very powerful evidence to convince the reader to wake up and change the way they think. Your vulnerability was an important motivator for the students sitting here today. It showed them that it's okay to be vulnerable. You demonstrate that it's important for us to think about, why do I live the life that I lead? And through the telling of your life and connecting it to larger socio-political movements, histories, and ideas, my students, many of you sitting here today, have had the courage to go on a similar journey of reflection and learning, and those reflections are why we asked you to be with us. We want to say thank you for your story and insight, and we hope that you can see the impact as it ripples to influence the lives of thousands. Our students learned details and content and facts about drugs policy. They learned skills through the training of Why Stop. But more importantly, they learned more compassion, they learned to be less judgmental, and to approach any issue with more nuance and holistic critical thinking. And many of them think very differently about themselves, their society, and their power to promote social justice. This transformative experience was initiated through the reading of your book and was more thoroughly facilitated through a photo voice project, which approximately 140 of my students used photography to reflect on salient themes in their lives. We facilitated 32 focus groups with more than 300 pages of transcripts and more than 330 images, and we analyzed all of them and brought that back to you this afternoon. It was an impressive outcome, both in its process and in its content. I've been a student or a teacher for 34 years. I've taught at 3 other postdoctoral institutions in this country. I've never witnessed such experiences as that which I am honored to have witnessed with those of you with us tonight. To my students, your courage to make yourself vulnerable, to reflect on your experiences, both mundane and the simply extraordinary, and to be part of this research project that helped you connect yourself to structures in society. This project has connected you to each other and to this institution. So at this point, can I please ask that those of you who were part of this journey to please stand, and can we as an audience recognize the work, reflections, and changes that these people have engaged? It has been an honor, a privilege, and when you did the assigned reading, an absolute delight to work with you over the past 9 months. We read Carl's book, and off the back of it engaged in discussions, debates, and downright shouting matches, right over there in LTO3, which where you were today, about topics ranging from domestic violence to feminism to decriminalization to sex education to parenting, to the pernicious and violent institutional racism that we see manifest in the militarized police brutality against African Americans in the United States today. To the students of personal and professional development, HS4 102, I offer you my deepest gratitude and respect. As some of you will have seen in our Photo Voice exhibition, 126 students represent 41 countries and speak 68 different languages. Their diversity and plurality of life experiences make them utterly unique and immensely inspiring. As a white, middle-class U.S. American, I have never been in such an educational situation where I could and did reflect on my position in society as much as I could and did with you. You truly taught me more about education, society, and humanity than I, as a trained anthropologist, ever thought I could learn. And you helped me find a voice I have wanted to embrace for many years. And now, I need to move on, because I'm not the main, this is the main event here. function as an empowering institution in society. To all of you, please thank that person in your life who made you see the world in a new light, who made you believe in yourself and made you think that the world can be something different. Carl Hart, his mentor at University of North Carolina and Wilmington, among many others. I had Bob. Bob Denton taught me to love my students as he loved and inspired me and so many others. My mantra has always been, find Bob, be a Bob. I also had a mother that taught me, through example, to always and consistently put the time, energy, and creativity to the demanding but utterly rewarding vocation of education. We can rehumanize dehumanizing systems that Carl will address in a few moments. I hope that what you are about to hear from Carl will contribute to your arsenal of details, facts, and ways of thinking that can help us change the narrative, to reclaim it for those who are most vulnerable in our society, and work together to advance an agenda of social justice and equality. Thank you. We have one more person who'd like to say something, and her name is Hope Chisanga, and she was elected by her classmates to speak on their behalf, to welcome Carl Hart. Good evening. Good evening. I'd like to thank everyone for this wonderful turnout this evening. To illustrate the journey that we've been through this project, I'd like to start with a quote. The paradox of education is precisely this, that as one begins to become conscious, one begins to examine the society in which he is in. James Baldwin. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been taken on an amazing journey of self-reflection. It was hosted by Dr. Jennifer Randall, but this journey was inspired by Dr. Carl Hart. We'd like to thank Jennifer so much for being our inspiration. She's been absolutely amazing. Jennifer is a credit to this university and every single student that she teaches this year and every single student she will teach. We'd like to thank you. Thank you, Jennifer. We'd also like to thank Carl Hart for being our wonderful inspiration. His book has been so amazing. Reading the book has inspired us and opened a new way of us to look at things. You know, Carl Hart's book helped us understand things and helped us look at evidence-based evidence. I'll use the word again, evidence-based information and literature about our society. For instance, just in relation to drugs and drug policy, a writer called Philippe Bourgeois. He's absolutely amazing because he spent 10 years of his life under the drug society, the people that we judge and kick out of society through issues like institutional racism. He went there and he lived with them, and he found that society is no different from our mainstream society. We sit there, we go out and we push people out of society to go and get a better job. It's the same thing, exactly the same thing, except we push them into this underworld system of drugs through issues, again, like institutional racism. So before we can sit there as a society and judge these people and punish them for taking drugs, we need to look at ourselves. We need to look at what we're doing as a society. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank Carl Hart again for his book. It's been so inspirational. He has brought themes that almost every single one of us in this room can relate to. Every single one of them. And what makes him so different from everyone is his experience. He's been so inspirational, and as a class, on behalf of all my students and colleagues, we would like to thank you. Thank you so much. It is my
now introduce to you, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Carl Hart.
I think I'm at. Can you all hear me? Is my mic on? Check, check. Mic on? Check. Check, check. Can you all hear me okay up top? Great. Damn, how do you follow an introduction like that? You know, I don't know what to say. I never had an introduction like this before. You know, and I have given dozens of lectures, maybe hundreds, I don't know. But I've never had an introduction that made me cry. And I was afraid that was going to happen because, you know, I've been talking to Jennifer recently, and if anybody knows Jennifer, she cries. She cries when people say thank you. So, anyway, it's a difficult thing to follow. But coming here, this is one of the best decisions that I've made in my life. After seeing that exhibit today, I know. You know, I am accustomed to operating in the world like the world, it's like me against the world. Because as you all have studied, and if you all are watching the world, black people are catching hell. And so in order to be successful, I had to operate like that. And then coming here to this exhibit, I see my story and everybody's story that they told me today and how they're inspired by my story. And these are my people. And I don't have to be in a fight. And it's an uncomfortable position for me. On the one hand, I thank you. I am so grateful to be with my people. Thank you. But then on the other hand, when you give talks and you do these public performances and these sorts of things, you have to be in a mindset to take no prisoners. And then when you're with your people like this, all is love, it's hard to be in that mindset. So it makes it difficult to deliver the lecture that I normally give. Because I'm normally giving lectures to my enemies. So bear with me, this is a new experience. And we'll see how it turns out. You all have read the book. Thank you. Thank you all for showing me so much love with the book. In fact, you showed me more love with this book than my UK publisher did. Apparently, they didn't think it was worth publishing because they didn't promote it in the UK. So you all should write to UK Penguin and tell them. That's the next class project. But when you give these kind of talks, you know, it's a difficult thing because you want to make sure you're engaging. You want to make sure that you communicate some education, some information, high-level, nuanced information, and that's difficult to give an engaging lecture that's nuanced. And I'm going to try and do that, but if I don't accomplish all that I wanted to accomplish, it's in high price, because that was the place where I could be more nuanced, and I can really talk about my story and why I got into the business of studying drugs. I got into this business because mainly I wanted to solve the problem of my community, and I thought the problems of my community were primarily drug addiction. So if I could solve or cure drug addiction, I could solve the poverties in the community, like crime and poverty and those sorts of things. So I got into the business to do good. But what happened was that I got an education while I got in this business. And as was nicely said, my favorite writer, James Baldwin, said this about getting an education. The paradox of education is precisely this, that as one begins to become conscious, one begins to examine the society in which he is being educated. And that happened to me. It's happening to you. I hope you are examining the UK society. And so you can see where the social injustices occur. I think this is a university, as I heard, that you all are into civic engagement. And thank you, John, for telling us what that means. I still don't know what it means, by the way. It'd be nice if you all were into social justice. That's what you all have to be into, social justice. Call it what it is. There are injustices that occur in societies. And it's our responsibility as educated people to do something about it. And I learned this from people like James Baldwin. I started to examine my society in the US, and there are so many injustices in the US. But I tried to do it through the lens of drug addiction, the neurobiology of drugs. In part of my education, one of the things that I learned a few things that kind of changed my thinking, blew my mind. One of the things that I learned was that there was this whole history of behavioral science about drugs that had been worked out. We already knew, but it wasn't really being shared with the public. There's this whole history. I mean, one of the places that I started in terms of understanding this history was with B.F. Skinner, the famous American psychologist. And I just want to describe just some animal experiments related to this. This is what we would call a Skinner box. An animal is in this box, and he has a lever, and he's hooked up to an intravenous catheter through his jugular vein. Every time he presses the lever, he receives an injection of cocaine or amphetamine or something. And so as I started my studies, the thing that I learned was that when you do these type of experiments, allow animal to receive an intravenous injection of a drug like cocaine, they will press this lever and to receive this injection until death. It's one of the first things I learned in my undergraduate education. But I didn't know that the animal didn't have anything in the cage besides its lever. He had nothing to do but press that lever. If you had nothing to do but press a lever to receive cocaine or amphetamine, what are you doing? I know what I'm doing. I mean, I don't even need the sort of isolation to select cocaine. But he had nothing. The animal had nothing. Of course they're selecting cocaine. But when you enrich that environment by putting another animal in there, particularly a sexually receptive animal in there, some sweet treats, some toys, they usually choose those other non-drug alternatives. But this wasn't part of the story that I was learning. But when I did learn it, we, myself along with colleagues, we thought we'd do some experiments with humans because we had heard all of these stories about crack cocaine users, that they would behave in ways like the animal. Only the animal in the isolated cage. They would only press the lever to receive another hit of crack cocaine. So we thought, okay, what if we brought some cocaine addicts into the lab? Addicts being those people who meet DSM criteria for substance use disorder. We brought these people into the lab, and we gave them alternatives. We found that some alternative as small as $5, which is about, what, £3 or so? Small as $5, the person would choose to take the money on at least on about half of those occasions. And when you increase, we replicated this experiment with methamphetamine. That's the new drug of concern in the United States. We replicated this with methamphetamine users, and they did the same thing. We increased the amount of money to something like $20. When you do that, this is the money, the $20, and this is the selection for drugs. When you do that, they almost never take drug. So what this told us that attractive alternatives consistently or robustly decrease drug-taking behaviors. It lets you know, or it let us know, that if you really wanted to alter people's behavior, there are some things that we can do in their environment, provide alternatives. That was one of the things that I learned that changed my thinking. Another thing that I learned that changed my thinking was that most of the people who use drugs don't have a problem. 80 to 90% of the people who use drugs don't have a problem. They are not addicted. 80 to 90% of the people. This was a message that was not being taught to me, was not being told to us. But these data we have known, certainly in the United States, for more than 40 years. I didn't know that most of the people who use drugs were not addicted. I didn't know that most of the people who use drugs took care of their families, paid their taxes, were responsible people. They were employed. And in the UK, sometimes they even become prime minister. Well, I don't know if David Cameron has admitted to it yet. Has he admitted yet? No. Yeah, it's an interesting thing because people say that in the UK, you guys are more advanced with your drug discussions and drug policies than we are in the United States. I don't think so, because our leaders, they proudly proclaim or announce that they have used drugs, right? Bill Clinton, George Bush, Barack Obama not only admits to smoking marijuana, but also using cocaine. The point here is not to besmirch or tarnish these guys' reputation. The point is just simply this, that these guys are the rule, not the exception. Most people who use drugs are fine. Drug use does not inevitably lead to some downward spiral of debauchery and addiction. That's the point. Another thing that I learned was that when we think about the history of drugs and drug policy and drug enforcement, we know that this history has been racialized in the United States, and I'm learning now from my good friends here in the UK, good friends at Release, Neve Eastwood and Natasha Duma, they've helped me. They're collecting data and showing that one of the things that is going on in this country, particularly as it comes to stop and search for drugs, that black people are, at least in London, they're about 3 times more likely to be stopped than white folks in the city or in the metropolitan area, but countrywide, it's about 5 times more likely. So in this country, these things are going on, and we know these things are going on. And in the United States, we have a long history of these things going on. This is an article from a New York Times piece in 1914 that's entitled, "Negro Cocaine Fiends Are a New Southern Menace." And in this article, some of the myths about drugs, about cocaine, are nicely summarized. One of the myths about cocaine was that black people, when they were snorting cocaine, they were unaffected by .32 caliber bullets. So you can shoot these folks and they keep coming because of the cocaine. They were unaffected by .32 caliber bullets. They also became better marksmen, so they could shoot better, and they became more murderous. This combination led to police forces in southern states, in the United States, in southern states. It led to them going to a higher caliber weapon to stop these guys on cocaine. Of course, we kind of laugh about this now, but these myths about drugs, they come back, they are recycled in slightly new forms, but they're the same types of myths. You've heard about all of these sorts of things. In fact, fast forward to 1986 or so, a time when I was here. I was living in the UK in 1986. You guys heard of a town called Swindon? I hear it's the hottest city in the UK. I lived in Swindon for about 2.5 years or so. I know many people. Has anybody been to Swindon here? You've been to Swindon. Oh, you lived in Swindon. Right on. You're the first person I ever met that lived in Swindon. 1986 or so, I was in Swindon. In the United States, we were getting crazy about crack cocaine, this new smokable form of cocaine. And we said that it was like no other drug we ever seen. One hit, you were addicted, causing pregnant women to use the drugs, despite the fact that they were pregnant, causing all of this violence. As a result, our government passed some of the most draconian and strict drug laws that we had ever passed. These drug laws basically punished people who were caught for crack cocaine violations 100 times more harshly than those people who were caught for powder cocaine violations. And one of the results, after a few years, people started raising concerns about who were being arrested for these drug charges. And one of the results that we saw of this law was that this graph shows the percentage of people who were arrested under these laws, arrested and prosecuted. 80% of the people arrested under these laws and prosecuted under these laws were black, even though black people didn't make up the majority of crack cocaine users. Now, in order to, I want to take a step back and look at the sort of chemical structure of crack cocaine and powder cocaine to see if this sort of difference was justified. If you would, please focus your attention to the left. That's powder cocaine. Focus your attention to the right. That's crack cocaine. If you go back to the left and look at the red circle, that's a hydrochloride group. That hydrochloride group is on the powder cocaine and is there to keep the compound stable, meaning that you can't smoke it. That's it. But if you want to smoke it, you just remove that hydrochloride portion. Somebody figured out that if you mix cocaine up with water and baking soda, heat it up, dry it up, you can get rid of that salt, that hydrochloride portion. Now, as a result of this, the myth was that this made crack cocaine a lot more dangerous, potent, addictive than powder cocaine. But when the evidence came in, we, along with other people, did the studies. Turns out, crack cocaine and powder cocaine are the same drug. It's true that crack cocaine's effects are more intense than snorting powder cocaine. But when you dissolve powder cocaine in water and inject it, they produce the same, the effects are the same as those produced by crack cocaine. Same intensity of effect. They are the same drug. The scientific evidence has been in for some time, and we know this. Yet the law remained the same. So in 2007, when presidential candidate Barack Obama was running to be our president, he said this about that differential treatment. He was not happy about the differential treatment. He said that judges think that's wrong, Republicans think that's wrong, Democrats think that's wrong, and yet it's been approved by Republican and Democratic presidents because no one has been willing to brave the politics and make it right. That will end when I'm president. The question becomes, did it end? He did get elected in 2008, by the way. Did it end? Not no, but hell no. It didn't end, but one of the things that happened was that the law was modified such that crack cocaine violations were now punished only 18 times more harshly than crack cocaine violations were punished 18 times more harshly than powder cocaine. Is that justified based on the science? No, of course it's not justified, but it continues to be the same to this day, even though we know it's wrong. And it continues to be the law of the land, even though we know that even today, more than 80% of the people arrested under these laws are black in the United States. and it continues today. So we will move on to another drug that we're concerned about in the United States. This is methamphetamine. Now, methamphetamine is our sort of new crack. And the people who are punished for methamphetamine in the United States primarily are white, poor white people in rural America, another group that we don't particularly care for in the United States. So there have been a number of things said about methamphetamine, a number of myths. The drug has a unique pharmacological profile. When I say unique pharmacological profile, I mean that it's like no drug that we have ever seen before. It's more addictive than any drug that we've seen before. All of the same things we said about crack cocaine. We also say that this drug causes brain damage, that it causes impairments in cognitive function. Again, let's look at the chemical structure of methamphetamine. Focus your attention on the left. That's amphetamine. On the right, that's methamphetamine. Back to the right, if you will, the only difference between the two compounds is this methyl group. And this methyl group is said to make methamphetamine more potent, more addictive, more dangerous. We heard this story before with crack, right? So one of the things that we wanted to do in the lab was simply compare the two drugs with each other. By the way, amphetamine is a drug that's commonly used to treat attention deficit disorder in the United States and around the world. It's also used to treat narcolepsy. This drug in the United States is a popular sort of prescription medication. So we wanted to know whether or not these drugs were different or how they were different. And so we ran a simple experiment. Other people, since 1971, beginning in 1971, had shown that when you gave the two drugs under double-blind conditions, oral doses of the drug, oral doses up to 30 milligrams, the two drugs produce identical effects. Other people had shown that. So one of the things we wanted to know, well, maybe if you give the drug via a route of administration that's associated with abuse, maybe you get differential effects. So we did a study in which we gave the drug intranasally, and we pushed the dose to 50 milligrams. So we increased the dose, and thinking that, okay, we'll see if there are differences. Maybe that's where the major difference is at in terms of when the drug is used via a route that's used related to abuse. So I want to just orient you to this slide just quickly. On the y-axis here, this is just a dependent measure. In this case, this is systolic blood pressure. In the black are data for placebo. In the light green are data for 12 milligrams of low dose of amphetamine. The dark green, low dose methamphetamine. Light red, high dose 50 milligrams amphetamine. The dark red, high dose 50 milligrams methamphetamine. The bottom line with systolic blood pressure here, the comparison is between the 12 and the 12 and the 50 and the 50. The bottom line here is that amphetamine and methamphetamine produces identical effects on systolic blood pressure, diastolic blood pressure, heart rate, temperature. The important physiological measures, they produce identical effect. Subjective effects, this is a rating of high. You also rate euphoria, stimulated alertness, all of those sorts of things. Again, they produce the same effect. We also gave these participants an opportunity to self-administer these drugs. Choose to take the drug. If somebody had a choice to take amphetamine versus methamphetamine, would they take one drug more than the other? Again, they produce the same effect. Bottom line is that the notion that methamphetamine has a unique pharmacological profile is just simply not supported by evidence. Let's now look at this information related to methamphetamine causes cognitive impairment and brain damage. I did a review, I published a review back in 2012 that systematically looked at the literature, brain imaging literature, and the cognitive functioning literature. When you look for cognitive differences in cognitive functioning, there is an important thing that we must do, and it's oftentimes not done in the scientific literature. If you're going to talk about impairments, you have to compare the scores of the group that you're testing with scores from a normative database adjusting for age and education. Does everybody understand that? Yes. It's a simple sort of requirement. You won't be testing 10-year-olds against college graduates, right? Or you won't be comparing you will not compare cognitive functioning of a high school graduate with a college graduate or university graduate. You wouldn't do that. That's inappropriate. The same is true with different ages, because we know these two variables impact cognitive performance. But that doesn't happen in the literature. Oftentimes you see these sort of disparities in comparison of groups. Now, that's an important thing I just want you to keep in mind as we think about the cognitive functioning. The bottom line is, when you look at the cognitive functioning of methamphetamine users and compare that to people who don't use methamphetamine, when you correct for age and education, methamphetamine users' cognitive performance overwhelmingly falls within the normal range. And when we think about brain imaging, that's another area where we have seen a lot of work in terms of drugs. Methamphetamine has been one of the major drugs that we've looked at. If you focus your attention on the left side of this graph, this is a graph, a brain imaging graph. Left side is the brain of a normal control. That's in quotes. On the right, you have the brain of methamphetamine users. Now, you can see the difference in this graph, right? How many people can see the difference in this graph? You don't really see any difference. That's not any real difference. But this is what you're told typically when you go to these talks and you think this is data. That's not data. These are pictures that are constructed in the lab by the person who's talking to you. And I can make those colors any way I want. But what I tell you, this is a PET imaging study. So let me just take a step back and tell you what happens with PET imaging. PET imaging is where we inject a radioactive compound in your body, in this case, one that binds to dopamine receptors in the midbrain. So you inject this drug into the body and goes to the brain and these dopamine receptors, and we think that as the drug binds, we get more lighting up. You can make it more colorful. So one interpretation is that there are more dopamine receptors in the normal control than in the methamphetamine users. Therefore, the methamphetamine users have caused some sort of damage such that they have less dopamine receptors than the normal control. So methamphetamine caused this damage. That's how we get there. There are a lot of assumptions that got me to that conclusion. There are a lot of flawed assumptions, or there are potentially flawed assumptions, because you might see less binding simply because there is a downregulation of those receptors. Downregulation happens when you take an agonist, a dopamine agonist. That's just a normal sort of body response. That's a normal response. It doesn't mean that there's a toxic effect, but that could be one of the things that's happening. I don't know. We would have to do more work to figure that out. But again, I won't make that conclusion, nor will I make the conclusion that we have seen damage here, especially when you look at the actual data. These are the actual data from those kind of pictures. Here is the data. On the right, on the left, here you see in the circles are data from the controls. In the triangles, you see the data from the methamphetamine users. And these are brain regions, the brain regions throughout the midbrain. This is the caudate nucleus, anterior putamen, posterior putamen. These are dopamine-rich regions. So if you look at this graph, one of the things that you can see is that the normal controls consistently have higher binding potentials, that's what we call it, higher binding potentials than the methamphetamine users. That's one of the things you see. Another thing you see in the graph is that there is considerable overlap between the methamphetamine users and the controls. You can see that there are some methamphetamine users who have higher binding potentials than some of the controls. So you see this wide range of overlap. Another thing that we don't know from these graphs is that you only take a picture typically at one moment in time. We don't know whether or not these effects or this picture was the same before people started using methamphetamine. We don't know that because we took pictures at one moment in time. So, when you think about so as I put the whole picture together in my review, I concluded that cognitive functioning and brain sort of imaging data showed that the methamphetamine users were overwhelmingly in the normal range. But despite this, interpretations of these findings by researchers were consistently pathological. They were consistently negative. And so one of the things that I had to ask myself as I wrote this paper was, why was this happening? Why do we see this sort of consistent negative interpretation in the drug abuse literature, or the drug use literature? Well, so I had to look at myself as a scientist and think about our training. I had to think about a number of things. But one of the most important things that I thought about was our funding. And we are funded by the National Institute on Drug Abuse, US. National Institute on Drug Abuse funds about 90% of all the world's research as it relates to these drugs that we're talking about. Did you all hear me? 90% of the world's research. That's a massive amount. So the question becomes, well, what is their mission? What is their focus? Well, their mission and focus is to focus on pathology, the bad things that happens related to drugs. So remember at the beginning of the talk, I told you that I discovered, along my studies, that 80 to 90% of the people who use drugs don't have a problem. They go to work and they have some mundane, boring experience about their drug use. Experiences that don't make it into documentary films or into bad TV shows or into newspaper articles that are salacious and incredible. Incredible being unbelievable, right? They don't make it into these experiences. So if you got an institution focused primarily on pathology and they fund 90% of the world's research in this area, what do you have? You have a disproportionate focus on pathology. And what does that mean for what gets published in the scientific literature? What does that mean for training, the training of those scientists? In the newspapers, what does that mean for your drug education? It means that you've been bamboozled. You've been hoodwinked. You've been lied to. That's what it means. That's what it means. And so, when you couple this with the fact that scientists in general tend to err on the side of caution, and in this case, caution means bad effects, as if there are no consequences to that act, to that action. If there were no consequences to erring on the side of caution, that'd be cool, wouldn't be a big deal. You wouldn't have me talking. But there are consequences, right? The consequences are this. This sort of thinking and this behavior helps to create an environment in which certain drugs are deemed evil, pathological. Any use of it is considered pathological. And so now the society has to focus on ridding itself of that drug or those drugs. And that is what has happened in your society, in my society. So I like to use this analogy to kind of explain this, what happens in science. This is an analogy when one loses their key at night and there's a spotlight shining. You're more likely to look under the spotlight because the light is there. In the drug use or drug abuse research field, the spotlight is on pathology. And that's where we are looking. We are almost exclusively looking for the bad things. And as Upton Sinclair has said, It's difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends upon him not understanding it. This is the situation that we find ourselves in when we think about drug abuse science. This situation has had multiple negative impacts, but I just want to talk about one right here, right now, as I think about this. I think about drug education. I think about the fact that we know that every year there will be people trying drugs for the first time. Surveys that we have conducted in our country, in your country, for the past 5 decades, we know that. We know there will be a number of people who try drugs for the first time. If these drugs are so evil and we have to rid ourselves of society, that means we can't teach people how to use these drugs. We can't teach people how to be safe. And that's what we do. We don't do it. We just simply ignore it. Now, I want to show you a clip of an embarrassing situation for a police officer because he didn't get the proper education for something as simple as marijuana. So let me just show you this clip, and then we can have a conversation.
A councilman from Dearborn, Michigan, is outraged over a 911 call. He wants to know why no charges have been filed against a police officer who admits to confiscating marijuana from suspects and then baking it in brownies. And when he and his wife were full and high, they thought they'd overdosed and called 911.
I think I've had an overdose and killed my wife. Overdose of what? Marijuana. So I don't know if it had something in it. Can you please unarrest me?
You guys have fever or anything?
No, I think we're dying. I don't know, we made brownies. I think we're that. I just don't like really cool.
Well, instead of being charged, the police department let the officer resign. His wife was not.
So you all get the point, right? We have, in the United States, in our lab alone, we have given thousands of doses of drugs like marijuana, cocaine. And so we have learned quite a bit about how to do it safely. We've learned quite a bit about the conditions under which negative effects are more likely, the conditions under which positive effects are more likely. We've learned quite a bit. And the taxpayers of the United States have paid for this. But we don't share this information in part because we say these things are so evil, we have to rid ourselves from society. And sharing this information seems to be inconsistent with that message if you're stupid. So we don't share that information. Now, I think about all the things that I have learned from my studies. There is nothing more clear to me than this fact. Drug effects are predictable. If you know a few factors, the dose, if you know something about how much you're taking, novice, new users, infrequent users, you should take lower doses. Crawl before walking. This is a simple message we can teach kids. It's simple. If you simply teach kids this message, you increase the likelihood of keeping them safe. This is just one simple message. Another sort of simple thing that we learned from our lab studies, and other people have learned this, is that the user's experience is critically important. Whether or not the person has developed tolerance. Tolerance, oftentimes when we think about the DSM or the ICD-10, I believe it is now, when we think about those sort of manuals, tolerance is talked about as if it's a bad thing. Tolerance is a good thing. It is protective. If someone has tolerance, you decrease the likelihood of them getting in trouble with drugs. We've known this from animal experiments. We know this from humans. Another thing we've learned is that the environment is critically important. Environment plays a role in altering or mediating or modulating drug effects. if people are whether people are getting high alone by themselves or with somebody with experience. All of these things are critically important. You want to make sure that people are using these substances in an environment that is not anxiety-provoking. That's critically important, because that anxiety-provoking environment could lead to a dangerous situation, a more dangerous situation. You want to know something about running, for example. The effects won't be felt for an hour or an hour and a half later. And we know police interactions with black boys, especially black women as well, are not predictable. Whereas drug effects are predictable. I know how to keep my kids safe with drugs. Those simple, basic lessons that we just talked about. But with the police, I don't know what to say. Don't interact with them. That's what I say. And we have multiple examples in the United States. You all probably know about Trayvon Martin. He wasn't interacting with the police, but some guy who was a security sort of watchman thought that he was high, thought that he was taking some drug. There's another guy in the Bronx about the same time period, Ramarley Graham. Police thought he was selling marijuana on the corner, chased him in his bathroom and shot him. Even if he was selling marijuana, it doesn't constitute being shot. Killed him, of course. Both of these kids, 17 or 18, kids, same age as one of my kids. And so this situation has many of us in the United States, we think that this sort of picture is a nice encapsulation or representation of what's happening with the war on drugs in the United States as it relates to particularly black men. You see this guy being chased by this army of police. This is in Baltimore. And you see in 1968 it's scratched out, but this is actually 2015. But our drug policies has actually facilitated this sort of thing. It has allowed this sort of thing to flourish in the United States. And people are starting to pay attention in the United States, finally, even though we've been talking about this for decades. People are starting to pay attention. Finally, for example, some scientists are thinking about it. Some professional organizations, like the American Psychological Association, this is from one of their recent covers of their recent monthly magazine called The Monitor. It has a picture of a black boy, and it says that the title is Building Resilience in Black Boys. So we're going to teach black boys how to be more resilient in American society. Now, I'll give you all a minute to think about that. So the American Psychological Association, organization that has more psychologists than any other organization around the world, a lot of smart people. Their solution is to build resilience in black boys. You have a sick society, and you're going to build resilience in black boys. That seemed misguided to me. That is disturbingly misguided. They should be out with their bully pulpit yelling about how sick the society is. But yet they're going to build resilience in black boys. I would not allow them to talk to my black boy if you don't understand this. But this is the kind of thing that happens in the United States, where we have misplaced where the focus should be. And somebody like me who observes society and acutely aware and plugged in and concerned about people, you know, as I walked, particularly, I'm seeing the group that's catching hell. It reminds me of the words, again, of James Baldwin, who just had the right thing to say so many times when he said, to be Negro in this country is, and to be relatively conscious is to be in a rage almost all the time. And that's how I feel in the United States, around the world in many places, in a rage almost all the time. And so one has to figure out what to do with this rage. especially when you deal with people with whom I deal. Many of them are not responsible for this rage. So you have to figure out what to deal with, how do you deal with this rage? Because those people are not responsible for it. So what do? Well, I try to figure out why this sort of thing goes on. It helps me to be in my head to try and figure it out. Then maybe I can write books or help present solutions to help other people. So my question is, for this, why are we as a public constantly misled? Well, I think as it relates to drug policy, I think that we're misled about drugs because it allows us to go after the people we don't like without explicitly saying so. So it wouldn't be cool for us in 2015 to say, we don't like those people, those poor white people, or those black people. It wouldn't be cool for us to say that in the United States. But it is cool for us to say that we're going to have these stiff sentences for anyone who smokes crack cocaine. And then we put all our law enforcement resources in black communities. Or we say we're going to have these stiff penalties for those people who use methamphetamine. And then we put all our law enforcement efforts in places where there are poor white folks exclusively. You can do that, and no one will question you. We also are constantly misled because it allows us to avoid dealing with the real problems that poor people face. Unemployment, substandard education, poor nutrition, you name it. You don't have to deal with these issues if you just simply say, those communities are screwed up because of drug use. Game over. You don't have to do anything but put more cops on the streets and arrest those people. You don't have to deal with these other more complicated issues. Another reason is that it increases the budgets of this thing that I'm calling the addiction industry. People like law enforcement, treatment providers, physicians, politicians, the media, even scientists, we all have benefited handsomely from this war on drugs. I certainly have. I have gotten $1 million worth of grants. A number of people have benefited from this war on drugs. People are fond of saying things like, the war on drugs has been a failure. That's one of the stupidest statements I ever heard. The war on drugs has been a huge success. It wouldn't continue if it wasn't a huge success. It's just that it's been a failure for people like you and me. It's been a failure for poor people. But it has been a huge success for these other people. It allows politicians to say stupid things about drugs. And it allows them to fund treatment and police. So they say things like the drug problem drugs should be treated as a health problem. No, it shouldn't. 80 to 90% of the people who use drugs don't need treatment. They don't need to be sentenced to the medical establishment. Nor do they need to be sentenced to the criminal justice system. But that's who are getting paid. Politicians give money to treatment providers and law enforcement. When most of the drug users, like me, don't need either. I just need them to leave me alone. So when I say these things that I have said, it would be helpful if I had a solution. So the question becomes, what can we do about it? So as I think about the exhibition that I saw today, it was quite emotional for me, quite moving. It changed me. It really helped me to understand the impact that the book is having. I have so much gratitude and love for you all, because you all are providing nourishment for me and energy for me to continue And I saw this in the exhibition. And so as I think about what we can do and what you can do, some of you all, particularly the folks in the class, you are in your first year. And you are such a diverse group, but mainly black, but from other places as well. We have Muslims, we have everyone here. And it's a lovely thing. But if you continue to work hard and be successful, you're going to have an opportunity to sell out. And for you, all of you all who don't know what I mean, because I am in the UK, you will have an opportunity to have personal gain at the expense of the larger group, your larger group. You will have that opportunity if you continue to be successful. So one of the things you can, but if you're going to make waves, you have to do this. You have to be the best. You have to put in the work. You have to really know your stuff. If you're going to stand up here and talk what I talk and say the things that I say, you have to absolutely be the best. So you got to put the work in. If you don't put the work in, I'm wasting my time. You're wasting our time. You have to put the work in. There is no substitute for just putting the work in and being the best. And critically evaluate your society. And me and other experts critically evaluate statements that we make. And some of you who are not in the class, especially, you ask, what can you do? You can get out of the closet about your drug use. The typical drug user that we see in these movies, in these documentaries, on TV, are the persons who are experiencing all kinds of problems. And usually the problems are not even caused by the drugs. They had the problems before the drugs. So we have to change the narrative such that people understand that the majority of drug users are responsible, are working, are taking care of their family. They are you. They certainly are me. So you have to get out of the closet. If you're not out of the closet, the narrative doesn't change. And you have to call out racial discrimination. You have to call it out as it is, what it is, even if it makes other people uncomfortable. You will be doing a service to those folks who have less of a voice. And work to change the legal status of drugs. Now, in High Price, I argue that we should decriminalize all drugs. I looked at what Portugal is doing. I looked at what the Czech Republic is doing. And I look at the fact that in the United States, we arrest 1.5 million people every year for drug-related violations, and 80% of those are for simple drug possession. So I thought we should decriminalize drugs. That is, treat drugs like a traffic violation. Maybe you'll get a warning, maybe you'll get a fine, but you don't go to jail. I thought that made a lot of sense. But after being out here for nearly 2 years, listening to people, thinking about this issue even deeper, I was wrong with decriminalization, I have discovered. We shouldn't be working for decriminalization. It's okay to start there, that's fine. We should be working for legal regulation of everything. Because decriminalization does not touch the issue that I'm primarily concerned with. I'm mainly concerned with the adulterants in the illicit drug market. I know how to keep people safe with heroin. I know how to keep people safe with cocaine. I know how to keep people safe with MDMA. I know how to do that. But I don't know how to keep them safe with the various adulterants because I don't even know what's in it. And the adulterants themselves are more dangerous than the drugs, than the parent drug, the drug that we're concerned about. And so ultimately, we will have to legally regulate this market. And it means that we might actually have to teach drug education and not drug propaganda. We might actually have to teach the facts about drugs, just like we have to teach the facts about sex, just like we have to teach, well, we don't do the sex very well, but it's an activity in which you all are engaged and proud to say you're engaged for the most part. Just like we have to teach people about driving their automobile. We have to do the same thing with drugs. And you know what? One of the things about being humans is that you have cognitive flexibility. You can change your strategy. You can change your mind. Constantly reevaluate. We haven't done that for the last 100 years. But it's incumbent upon us as humans to do this sort of thing. So if we decide that if we legalize the drug market and decide that there's too many problems, we simply change our approach. Nothing wrong with that. But we've been behaving as if, oh, once we do this, we can never change. It's silly the way we do these sorts of things. I think I should make that my final point and end so we can have questions, because I think we have run overtime as it is. Thank you for your attention. Do we have questions? And we have a microphone.
Yes. You have a microphone. All right, Johnny's our microphone runner. Thank you, Carl. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
Really good. We have a question. We'll start with Yankuba and then Susan. Do you want to take it one by one?
Yeah, that's cool, because my cognitive, yeah, that's fine.
My question for you is, the government over here, I'm not sure whether you're aware of this, are trying to take out on benefits, I think in America they call it
Welfare. Right.
How important was welfare in your household when growing up?
Question is, how important was welfare in my household when I was a kid? Without welfare, I wouldn't be standing here before you. So there were government programs that supported my mental, physical development. From a very early on as a child, we received welfare benefits or we wouldn't have eaten. We wouldn't have had a roof over our heads, all of those sorts of things. And then even later as a scientist, I got various benefits that were for minority scientists. Without those kind of benefits, I wouldn't be where I'm at today, paying taxes in the United States to help other people. And so those government benefits, they are what we should be doing in a humane society.
So my question relates to how money's spent about the drug research. So I have two questions. One, do you think that the majority of neuropsychopharmacological research concerning drug addiction now is a waste of time and a waste of money? And secondly, if you were neither, what would you be spending your money on instead?
Damn, those are great questions. The first question is, do I think most of the neuropsychopharmacological studies are a waste of time? It's a question that has to. No, I don't think that they're a waste of time. But I do think that most of the studies, or most of the money, are put into. I think the priorities are screwed up. For example, we have a disproportionate focus on studies that are looking at brain mechanisms, when we could be looking at more malleable factors, and that will be a lot more helpful more readily and more quickly. So I think that the money is disproportionately spent, and I think that's inappropriate. Now you ask what I would do if I had some influence at NIDA or the head of NIDA, or so I am, as a matter of full disclosure, I'm a member of NIDA's advisory council. So I'm a member of the council that advises the director. Now I should tell you, I don't think the director wants to hear anything I have to say. So I should say that. In part because what I think should be done is, when I showed you those statistics about the racial discrimination in drug arrests and those sorts of things, those were not NIDA studies. NIDA doesn't do that kind of stuff. It hasn't really focused on trying to understand how drug arrests, drug incarceration, how these things disrupt people's life trajectories, their mental health, their life expectancy, all of these sorts of things. I would be funding that. I would be looking at those sort of issues. I certainly would put a lot more priorities on those issues. That's not what NIDA does or has. That has not been a priority of NIDA. And that troubles me. And I let it be known at all the meetings that I attend. And so they are comfortable with politely ignoring me. Where are we? So I can look.
Thank you very much for that. I'll be back. I'd like to say something a bit more about the methodology. Your colleague, Carl Hart, who obviously said his last part of the
David Knox.
Yes.
Who? You're right. Okay.
He talks a lot about the problems of getting permission from the Home Office to actually do drug research. As you know, he was involved in the government before his complaints quite a lot about that. I wonder if you could say a bit about how you actually acquire these substances, in inverted commas, and also what kind of design you use. Do you use kind of like randomized controlled trials? Do you use kind of comparison studies? Kind of come up with results?
Yeah, so the first question is related to how you get permission to do these studies. Well, I think in the United States, I think the safeguard and the regulations for doing these studies are, I think they are appropriate. People with the appropriate training, make sure that you have all the safeguards in place. I think we are reasonable in the United States about those things. I know there has been some concern about that. But in the United States, there are a number of people giving these drugs and studying these drugs. And we have a lot of information, and I am delighted that we are collecting this data. Now, you asked about the methodology. It all depends what the study question is. Some of the studies use small within subject designs where the person gets the drug under double-blind conditions and they experience all the drug conditions. And sometimes you can pair one group with another group, but it's always double-blind and the most rigorous sort of techniques or methodologies that we have.
Thank you.
I think it's always important to look at who benefits. So we talk about more involved who benefits. How do they benefit? How much work has been done on the potential economic consequences of reversing the war on drugs? If you look at, say, the prison system, the police system, the revenue of cities, localities, and so forth, where are the interests embedded on what will be the negative effect, perceived or actual, to the economy of vulnerable areas?
Yeah, so who benefits? And like you want to know the specifics. So for many years in the United States, law enforcement, hiring in law enforcement was always higher than most industries. And when we look at the hiring of law enforcement included in this sort of thing. So when you start to look at who's benefiting the most, it's primarily on the law enforcement side. And so you say, well, Does that mean that you will know that people will lose their jobs as law enforcement? And that's an important question, and people worry about that. What about the the folks who run prisons? Will they lose their jobs? They all are very concerned about that. When I think about law enforcement, for example, we can just simply shift what we're requiring or asking of law enforcement officials. For example, one of the things that I'm concerned about is that are adulterants in drugs. I'm worried about street drugs containing adulterants. Law enforcement confiscates drugs on a regular basis, but they never publish the content in these drugs. So they'll say, we got this big shipment of heroin, of MDMA. They say this sort of stuff. It's like, fine. Tell us if the drug contained adulterants. And if they contain adulterants, why not publish it in the local communities and let people be aware what the adulterants are and the potential harms related to the adulterants? You can shift law enforcement sort of responsibilities from the sort of war on drugs to a more public health, a more public safety sort of focus. That's what they're supposed to be doing. But that hasn't been the focus. So you can think about just shifting what we're asking of these people. You don't have to fire them. They don't have to lose their jobs, but we can shift their responsibilities.
I think that's a really nice interpretation of protect and serve.
Yes. Absolutely.
Okay, Carl, thank you very much for coming to us today. I have a question for you, sir. We read this book written by a fellow Black American, Michelle Alexander. The book is called The New Jim Crow. That's the title of the book.
I never heard of it.
The New Jim Crow.
I'm joking.
In her book, she said, race relations in America still in me. She went on to say that even Obama, can be the president of America, in the White House, the first black in the White House, has even blinded people about race relations in America. For someone we grow to admire, to appreciate, to love, for your book during this term. Can you talk to us about race relations in America? I'm not expecting white or wrong answer from yourself, but just anything you can share with us, we appreciate it. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I could barely hear. Something's up with the sound. The last part I didn't hear. Talk to you about... Oh. Talk to you about race relations in America. I don't know what race relations means, but I can talk to you about racial discrimination in America and racial injustice in America. I mean, race relations, I think we get along quite well in America. It's just that we are subjugating people, but we get along well. So relations are beautiful. They're fine. And you made comments about Obama having blinders, right? I think that's an important point.
She said even Obama becoming the first black president of the United States has even blinded people about...
Yeah, I don't think Obama is blind. He's probably the smartest president we've had. You guys have seen our presidents. Obama is a smart guy. It's not blinders. He has astutely avoided dealing with racial discrimination. That's different from having blinders. I mean, we all know what's going on. And as I pointed out with the crack cocaine, the powder cocaine difference, even his own words shows that he's clear. He knows what's going on. I just don't think he has the political courage to do the right thing, as that's the case with many officials in the United States. That's why I pointed out here in this room, one of the first things is like, you all will have an opportunity to sell out. Don't do it. We've had too many people who sold us out. And that's the problem. That's precisely the problem. If people were just courageous and do what's right. But, you know, I just don't know what kind of payoffs they get. Maybe the payoffs are just too much. That's being sarcastic. The payoffs are not too much.
Can I have 2 more questions?
So 10% of people are addicted, whereas 90% of people who use drugs aren't addicted. Is there anything will come up in research that will show how to deal with the people who do become addicted to drugs? With legalizing drugs, there will inevitably be those 10% who destroy their lives and those lives of people around them.
Yeah, so when we think about the people who are actually addicted, the people who are having problems, one of the things that I tried to do in High Price was not to make this a book about addiction. And everybody was trying to make it a book about addiction. The people who are addicted already get too much attention. They get more attention than the other folks who are not. So I tried not to get into that. But, of course, people always are trying to pull me there. And so I had to think about this. So when we think about this fact, the majority of the people who use these drugs, all of these drugs, are not addicted. Just that simple fact alone tells you that it's not the drug itself. So that means that you might actually have to look at the person who's addicted and see what's going on in that, with that person, in that person's environments. You might have to actually do a real assessment. That means that you probably shouldn't send them to places like AA and expect miracles, because that's not one of those places where you're going to get some serious assessment done to figure out what's the problem. You might not want to send them to these free self-help places if you actually care about them. And then, but no knock on the sort of self-help places, because they're fine maybe for other things like social interactions, to have a social network. That's great. That's great for that. But then when we think about other treatment places, they don't even do a really good assessment. They have one shoe fits all, when in fact we know some people are addicted because of co-occurring psychiatric illnesses, because of they haven't developed the responsibility skills to temper their behavior in multiple domains. All of these sorts of things and other things might be the reason that the person is addicted. But we actually have to look at them and give them a decent assessment.
Hi, Dr. Carl Hart.
Hi. I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Oh, don't be nervous. I'm the one in front of everybody. You're fine. So your first question is whether or not I've been contacted by the U.S. government to help them deal with drugs. No, not well. I have testified before Congress for marijuana only, just related to marijuana. No, this government is. I think that they are. How should I say? They are reluctant to actually talk to me, because I actually have some principles, and I will call a spade, and then I will write about it and that interaction, and some people might get embarrassed. So I haven't really been contacted by our government, but I have by the government in Colombia, the Brazilian government, Those kind of places I have. I've talked to those people, but not the U.S. government. And then your second question was what I would do if I became president. First of all, if I ran for president, I hope somebody in this room shoots me. I have no desire to be a political leader or a politician in any way. In fact, I don't like politicians. I mean, there are a few people that I dislike. Politicians are very high on that list. That's why I talk to the people. Politicians are cowards, just by the nature of what they do. There are a few of them who are not. They don't lead. They pretend to lead. But they really are worried about voters, what voters' opinions. So the voters have all of this power that they really need to exercise. And so I talk to the voters, not the politicians. Because life is too short for less than honest and genuine people. I don't even like talking to academics for the same reasons. Thank you all for your time. Thank you, man. Good to meet you.
At this time, we would like to listen to music for all. And so, Carl Hart, another student from our law school.
Well, thank you, Carl, for taking us along this journey and for this fantastic talk, which is definitely, I think, the culmination of this great first year here at UEL. I would also like to thank UEL for inviting Carl and giving us, as first-year students in health promotion, public health and health service management, the opportunity and the experience we've had. The use of Carl's book High Price for the module of Personal and Professional Development by Jennifer Randall has been a great way of looking at a number of topics that are relevant and important to our course. They have been said before, I think. This led to very engaging lectures and a high participation of all students, and the discussions that came out of there were incredible. It enabled us to learn so much from each other. I feel this is how education should be. Your life story, Carl, has been an inspiration for me. It shows what power education can have, and I'm sure that a lot of my fellow students agree with this. I am so proud to be part of this class, to be part of this year. And Jennifer has already said how many languages we speak, from how many countries we come. But we also come from all walks of life, and we brought to this class a great knowledge and wealth of experience that enabled us to share all this. So we have to turn this over. I'm